I am Dustin Baker. This is VikesNow. I'm here with Josh Frey. We are less than a month away from mandatory minicamp. That's our next milestone. Every month on the calendar, we have something new in the off season. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good now that things have definitely started to slow down a little bit, catch our breath a little bit, and just take in the off season. It's been a good couple weeks.
Yeah, behind the curtain, you can transition to baseball now and get away
Yeah, a
with
little
it.
bit. Yeah, rocking the Brewers today. So
All right. Well, here's the deal. Late Friday night, while a lot of us were awaiting the Lakers clinching Game 6 over the Warriors, boom, Za'Darius Smith was traded. I think most of us thought that financially they could gain an extra million and a half if they waited until June 1st. But then that just turned out to not be the gig. Evidently, there were a few trade suitors for Za'Darius Smith, and he ultimately went to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's old team, the Cleveland Browns, for 2 fifth-rounders. But then the Vikings also gave a sixth and a seventh. Predictably, I guess there was a little bit of like, what are we doing here? This is a Pro Bowler. I think a lot of casual fans expected the Vikings to fetch something a lot grander than 2 fifths or basically a pick swap. Where did you land on the efficacy of the Za'Darius trade?
ultimately, I don't think we can be super upset about it because he made it clear 2 months ago that he wanted out. And unless they somehow came to some grand revolution where they could just, or grand revelation where they could just bring all three of these guys into the defense and everybody would be hunky dory, I think this was kind of inevitable. I do wish that we would have gotten a little bit more than 2 fifth-round picks, especially considering we also gave up a sixth and a seventh rounder. So that stung a little bit considering how good Za'Darius is when he's healthy. 10 sacks last year, double-digit sacks in 3 of the last 4 seasons when he's been healthy. So I do wish that we got a little bit more. And I was a little nervous considering we also took on a little bit of money from that contract. But now that it's only like
1.1.
1.1 million, I'm not going to be super upset about that. So I was more worried that it was going to be like 4 or 5 million or something
Yeah,
like that. But 1.1, we can do that. Now we got cap space moving into the season. We'll be good to go.
that cracked me up. So on Friday night, waiting for that Laker game to start, the news broke, and then I tried to explain why the trade was the way it was. That, like you said, the guy didn't want to be here. And I guess in theory, you could play hardball and just say, well, you're not playing anywhere, but it doesn't really feel like this culture of Vikings front office does that. So I was arguing with folks on Twitter, or at least breaking it down to how it made sense to me. And then that tweet from Ben Gessling dropped that said the Vikings, per Mary Kay Cabot, are going to take on some of Za'Darius' salary. And then the people I was arguing with started sending that to me in direct messages. And I'm like, well, that would be weird if they're just going to pay for it. And then yesterday it was 1.1 million. It's like, really? That's what we were squabbling over. So I think I took solace in knowing that if there were 3 suitors for Za'Darius Smith, it's highly unlikely that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah took the worst of the three deals. So although it sucks you couldn't get more than pick swaps for a Pro Bowler, I think the stage was set when Za'Darius on March 9th said, goodbye, I'm not playing
Right.
here anymore. And I still can't figure out if that's because he wanted a raise or he got word that Marcus Davenport was on the way. I don't know. But now that we have Za'Darius gone and he plays with Dalvin Tomlinson's team, Kevin Stefanski's team, Kellen Mond's team, Dalvin Cook, the trade sweepstakes, is still heated up. And frankly, I'm tired of writing and talking about it because it's lasted for 2 months. And usually for trade sweepstakes, I'm like, all right, yeah, these are fun. This one is exhausting. It sounds like the Vikings might want to do right by Cook and get him somewhere where he wants to go. They could just release him, and then obviously he can do that on his own. But knowing what you know now about the Za'Darius trade and somewhat of a whimper on the package that they got back, what is your expectation for Dalvin Cook's exit, assuming that that's what you believe will occur?
Well, ultimately, I've kind of thought all along that this was going to be the lesser of the 2 trade packages between him and Za'Darius Smith. So seeing Za'Darius go for 2 fifths and you have to give up 2 picks on top of that as well, it makes me a little bit more confident that it's not going to be a very big return package if the Vikings do end up trading him. But for this one, it kind of feels like this is going to keep lingering, with all the reports that they want to do right by him. And with some uncertainty in terms of running back rooms across the NFL, with Alvin Kamara in New Orleans, who knows what happens with him and his legal stuff, Joe Mixon, and then Josh Jacobs holding out for a contract. So between those 3 teams alone, that's 3 suitors outside of the Miami Dolphins, who have been pretty much the leaders of this pack for the entire time. I don't know if I necessarily buy that either, but that's 3 rooms right there that definitely could use a talented veteran running back if it comes down to it. And one of these 3 guys isn't available to play week 1. So I think that between that and then maybe some training camp injury pops up, who knows, across the league, that stuff happens all the time. It feels like the Vikings are going to just wait and see what happens, because ultimately, if they cut him or they trade him, they save pretty close to the same amount of money. So I don't think that they're going to be in a super big rush to get on to move on from this guy.
So here's one thing I want to mention, that kind of a dark horse thing. So Alexander Mattison, Dwayne McBride, Ty Chandler, Kene Nwangu, Dalvin Cook. That's a full house. But right now, the Vikings have $11 million in cap space, and that's with Za'Darius already baked into the number. So it's not like they get 11 million when Za'Darius leaves. They're going to get more. They get about 20 million. Is there any scenario where they just keep him?
I think at this point, they didn't trade him during the draft. That seemed like it was going to be the time where he's going to get moved, if at all. And I feel like the longer that this goes on, especially if those 3 situations that we talked about get sorted out somehow, I think that there's a chance that they just hang on to him for at least 1 more year, because either way, if you trade him next offseason, you still save the money for next year. And that's probably what they're banking on more than anything else at this point, because free agency's pretty much wrapped up for the 2023 offseason. There's not much more you're going to be able to do that really impacts the roster. So I wouldn't be upset if they just held on to him for the 2023 season, because at the end of the day, he's still a very good running back. Like he's definitely, it feels like he's lost a step or 2 over the course of his career. I mean, he's definitely not the 2019, 2020 back that we saw just breaking off these huge runs. But even then, he was able to do that a couple times last year. He had a few really big plays. So I wouldn't be upset if they just held on to him.
And he does have the surgically repaired shoulder that evidently
Right.
was a problem for 3 or 4 seasons. The weird part about this, so I'm with you. I still ultimately think that this ends in a trade or release. But when me and you and the rest of the Vikings themed world cooked up the theory that Cook was too expensive for the Vikings, that's when we desperately needed cap space for the team. So, we're like, all right, Dalvin Cook's probably gone because he's got a $14.1 million cap hit. You were thinking, how can we cut all these guys to sign more free agents or afford the Jefferson contract or afford what we thought could be a Kirk extension? But now they're sitting pretty with Cook's money already there. So it's like, if we would have known that now, then it's like they could do everything. They can keep all these running backs and then just pay Cook. It will always seem odd that the Moneyball general manager will invest that much money in running backs. But I'm with you. The longer that this keeps going into the summer, you kind of start to ask yourself, like, well, maybe Dalvin Cook just plays in 2023. I think the only smoking gun piece of evidence is that there's just too many damn running backs.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the fact that if you buy into social media at all, the Vikings change their banner photo on Twitter to include Alexander Mattison rather than Dalvin Cook. So yeah, I'm with you. I kind of feel like at some point there's going to be some sort of move.
Yeah.
There's going to be inevitably a team that needs a running back this summer, and they might do a panic buy and send a little bit too much in order to get a guy like Dalvin Cook onto their team. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that the longer this goes on, the likelihood of Dalvin Cook just staying in Minnesota 1 more year keeps on getting higher. But yeah, it's definitely like 25% chance is probably where I'm at right now.
The thing that I've been trying to figure out. So when the schedule dropped, they had like a 4-image slideshow, and the Alexander Mattison was featured with Hawkinson and Jefferson. Was Cook in the banner of the cover photo? And then they were like, whoa, we got to change that? Or is it just that Mattison was in it and not Cook in general?
I think they had a similar one last season that Cook was in,
Okay.
And then they just updated it again yesterday, and it was Mattison instead of Cook.
Okay.
And a bunch of ESPN people got a hold of it and like, oh, well, look at this.
Yeah, that is now. Usually on those things, like, if blah 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 guy likes a tweet about a trade to the blah blah blahs, I'm like, come on, people. Like, scrubbing their Instagram of the team name, we've done that 100 times and never means anything. But that one actually does kind of mean something, where if you're building the storefront and you don't have, the ultimate cheeseburger picture on the menu, you're probably not selling the cheeseburger anymore. That's where I'm at. So normally, whether it comes to social media clues, I just smirk and giggle because people like just salivate over them. This one actually might have some credence because, you're putting Mattison on the billboard, so to speak. All right. So with the cap savings, we should think we're staring at about $11 million for the Vikings. If they offload Cook in some capacity, that goes to $20 million. In theory, I don't think they'll do this now because they don't need to, but in theory, if they restructure Brian O'Neill, they could be at $30 million. And then, the Vikings suddenly are the summer players in free agency with slim pickings. But what do you expect them to do with the 11 million? Or if it goes to 20 with Cook, do you expect them to look at Ndamukong Suh late this summer or Marcus Peters? Or are they just going to roll it over for a rainy day in 2024?
I do think that especially as training camp gets going, you probably have to look at some of these guys like Ndamukong Suh. Like you said, he's probably not. I think he said already he's not going to sign with the team until like right before week 1 or something like that, or maybe it's right at training camp. So we got a little bit of time before we really get into that. But I do think that he fills a need for the Vikings that they have right now, regardless of how old he is at this point, because no more Dalvin Tomlinson.
Mm-hmm.
You probably could use another guy on the interior of that defensive line that can really stop the run, get to the quarterback, just be a physical presence in there. So I do think that he'd be on the radar, maybe a Marcus Peters. I ultimately think that they'd probably go get one of these veterans that's left in the secondary, just because I've been pounding the table for that all offseason.
Yeah.
It just hasn't really happened yet. But I mean, you look at it right now, I got the full list pulled up. Byron Jones, Marcus Peters, William Jackson, Bradley Roby. All these guys are starters that feel like Bradley Roby, especially. He's a guy that can play either in the slot or on the outside. So he'd be another very versatile guy that you can just play all over the secondary, depending on how the growing pains go for the Vikings young cornerbacks this season. So I do think that they'd probably look at one of those guys. But outside of that, I'd feel fine just rolling into the season and seeing what happens, because again, injuries are going to happen, and the Vikings almost ran into some really big troubles last year on the offensive line. So I wouldn't be too upset if they just rolled in and as the season goes on, pick up a few guys as you need, just to fill in some depth here and there. But yeah, I'd go get a corner, maybe Ndamukong Suh, then just roll in.
Yeah, most of it will be slim pickings from here on out. However, there's always, I would say, about 10 or 12 guys, even around week 1, when you're like, oh, all right, well, this guy would be good. And so all of those cornerbacks, it's unlikely that all 5 of the ones that are fringe starters would sign. And so, yeah. And the one thing I've been trying to ask myself is if they're content with these cornerbacks, that's fine. I trust Brian Flores, but how does he know? Would he just watch tape and then he can predict that Andrew Booth is going to be a stud? Like, it's kind of odd to me that they're content with all of these youngsters when Brian Flores, I don't think, has even like hung out with them on a practice field.
Well, and my thing too is just, even if they are studs on the field, they've all gotten hurt in the past year. Like they can have all the talent in the world, but if they can't stay healthy, then you still need other guys out there. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. It feels like an incomplete room still, even with all the attention that it got at the draft.
Yep. And if the Cook stuff comes to fruition June 1st, June 2nd, or whenever, they'll have about $20 million in cap space. And it's really like a playground then, because none of these guys are going to fetch like 15 million. There's like none of those people are available anymore. Waited too long. So they'll have the flexibility if they wanted, if these injuries hit, to get like 3, 4, and 5 guys with that type of piggy bank this late in the game. All right. The schedule was released last Thursday. The Vikings have 5 primetime games, 9 away games, 8 home games. And interestingly, no cold weather games unless you think Cincinnati will be cold in mid-December. Give me 3. I apologize if I stole your thunder. Give me 3 things that stand off the page about that schedule that hit last Thursday.
Well, number 1 was the primetime game, so you did take that one away from me. But yeah, 5 primetime games, most that they've had since 2018. Hopefully this season goes a little bit better than that one did, but it definitely makes sense considering how high powered that offense was all season. Makes sense that the NFL would try to get Justin Jefferson on every single TV screen that he can over the course of the year. So, and only one of them's a Thursday night game, and that happens to be week 2 rematch against Philly, which was my second takeaway. Get another shot at these Philadelphia Eagles, see what you can do in Philadelphia. And it feels like the early season last year, it felt like the late season was a real test for the Vikings with that stretch of the Bills, the the Cowboys, the Patriots, the Jets, all those guys all in basically a month's time.
Mm-hmm.
But this season, it's the exact opposite. You got big time playoff teams coming right away. It gets started basically with Philadelphia in week 2 and goes all the way until week 8, basically. Once you get to the bye later on in the season. So yeah, I think that's going to be another big thing. We're going to see right away what this team is truly capable of. There's not going to be any of this wishy-washy stuff. Well, they beat the Lions by 5 points. Is the Lions team really that good? Should they really be beating the Lions by more than that? We're not going to have much of that this season, I don't think. We're going to either see something like a 6-2 team where, yeah, this is a true Super Bowl contender. They should be taken seriously, or they're going to be flopping to 2-6, 4-4, something like that. And we're just, yeah, this is another one of those Vikings teams that maybe can make a run down the stretch and make the playoffs, but they're probably not gonna make too much noise once they get there. So those are two of the big ones. And then finally, we don't have to go to Lambeau in the snow this year. Mm-hmm. that's honestly, that might be the biggest one for me, because last couple of years that's happened, hasn't really gone well for the Vikings. This year you get that away game over with early on. I think it's in October, I remember correctly. And then you got them week 17 in your home building, potentially fighting for a division title. You got 3 straight games against the Lions, the Packers and the Lions again. So if you really want to go win the NFC North this year, that's going to be the time to do it.
It feels like the end of the schedule, unless there's some awful thing where the Vikings are only, 6-7, or what would it be by that time? 6-9. If they're not good, then those games, of course, won't mean anything. But it's shaping up that for the first time in forever, the very end of the season can mean something, because usually we get stuck with the Bears. One of the 2 teams is going nowhere, and the game is meaningless. On the 2018, I always like to point this out for reference. That was the last time you talked about the 2018 season, all the primetime games. That was the last time the Vikings had a really good defense. There's this theory that's false, that the Vikings defense fell off a cliff after 2017. It's not true at all. The 2018 defense was wonderful. It's just that Cousins wasn't quite acclimated, I guess, and they couldn't get the job done. But the 2018 defense was dominant. 2019 was pretty good. And then after Danielle Hunter injured his neck in 2020, that's when we've just been in the basement since. And then to lift up your point, I want to reiterate because I love it. The nasty part of the schedule last year started with the Buffalo game and went through Thanksgiving, and the Jets were pretty good. The mushy part of the schedule is like that exact time frame now. So when we were thinking about Murderers Row in November, that's when you start to look up and exhale. There's like this stretch between November something up until the Bengals game where they're winnable games, whereas out of the gate, if you start looking at wins and losses on the schedules, I think the Vikings will be lucky to be 3-3. And that feels horrible to say, because it's like, oh, that's settling for mediocrity. And I'm like, well, no, you're playing the Chiefs, you're playing the Chargers, you're playing the Eagles. You're probably going to lose. You're definitely going to lose 2 of those games, unless you have like this team from heaven that none of us foresee. But yeah, it's really weird how the dynamic changed, because I was doing this show last year and I remember talking about the hard part of the schedule. And now those exact time frames are the mushy part. All right, sir. Let's see. What's next week? We'll chat. I think we can start thinking about some roster projections. The weird thing about this Vikings roster right now, whether you write your own good sir on purpleptsd.com or mine, is that when you're projecting starters right now, there's not a ton of mystery. Like,
doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, when I look at the lay of the land and what some of my peers are saying, I'm like, yeah, none of this is surprising at all. I think the Khyiris Tonga spot will be interesting to see if he, at his incredibly affordable price tag, if he is indeed the new Dalvin Tomlinson. The cornerback room is interesting, but it's like only because Andrew Booth and Caleb Evans have to be good. Otherwise, you have a shitty quarterback or cornerback room. And then the offense is like open and shut. And then the only thing to watch is whether or not KJ Osborne can fend off Jordan Addison for however many weeks in the regular season. So I think we'll start transitioning to some roster projections and battles. But as for May 17th, sir, you got anything else?
That's about it. It's been a fun week. See you next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully the Lakers get back on track on Thursday night, sir. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
See ya.
Later.